She thought she'd marry a handicapped millionaire, but the vows unveiled a secret. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The morning haze hung low over the marble steps of the Lawson estate, the kind of place where every inch of the front garden looked like it had been trimmed by angels and every window shimmered like polished silver. Emily Carter stood frozen at the foot of those steps, clutching the small folder that held her mother's medical bills, past due, stamped in bold red, and the letter from the hospital saying treatment would be suspended if she didn't pay by Friday. Her breath trembled in the chilly autumn air. She could smell the rich scent of cedar coming from the mansion, a stark contrast to the faint detergent that lingered on her thrift store blouse. She didn't belong here. She knew it. Everyone knew it. And yet she forced her feet to move. The heavy oak doors opened with a soft mechanical glide, revealing a man in a charcoal suit waiting like he'd been expecting her down to the second. Mr. Hale, personal attorney to the Lawson family, tall enough to make the doorway look small, adjusted his glasses and gave her a polite but clinical smile. Miss Carter, you understand the terms. Emily swallowed, nodding even though her voice refused to leave her throat. She understood too well. Marry Nathan Lawson, the only son of the billionaire Lawson dynasty, a man rumored to be paralyzed from the waist down after a horrific accident months ago. A man she'd never met. A man who supposedly needed a wife by the end of the month to secure control over the family's philanthropic foundation. In exchange, the Lawsons would erase her mother's medical debt. One signature, one ceremony, 1 month living as his wife. Mr. Hale guided her through the hallway where every portrait seemed to watch her with quiet judgment. You are not required to perform any marital duties, he said, fumbling for a professional tone. This is strictly a contractual arrangement. Appear with him in public. Attend the wedding ceremony. Remain discreet. No press, no questions. Emily whispered, and he truly can't walk? Mr. Hale hesitated for the first time. That's what the world believes. It is in your best interest not to inquire further. That sentence hit her wrong, but she didn't have room for doubts. Not when the clock on her mother's life was ticking. The door to Nathan's private study opened. Emily braced herself for pity, for fragility, for a broken man in a wheelchair. Instead, she saw broad shoulders outlined beneath a slate blue shirt, his back turned to her as he signed documents at a mahogany desk. A sleek chrome wheelchair sat nearby, untouched, like an artifact rather than a necessity. When he finally turned, his eyes, cold steel under warm light, met hers. Sit, he said softly, though his voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Emily lowered herself into the chair opposite him, heart pounding loud enough to echo. He studied her, not with contempt, but with the unsettling precision of someone evaluating risk. You will find a list of rules inside your contract, he said, tapping a folder. No touching, no questions about my condition, no entering my private wing of the estate. You will attend the wedding tomorrow morning. You will smile, and you will leave me alone. Emily forced herself to lift her chin. I'm not here to bother you. I'm here to save my mother. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Pain, or regret, or maybe just the exhaustion of someone who had been pretending far too long. Good, he murmured. That makes two of us using each other honestly. She didn't understand what he meant, not yet. But as she signed the final page, her hand trembling slightly, a gust of wind pushed against the windows, and she couldn't shake the strange tightening in her chest. Something about him didn't match the rumors. Something didn't match the wheelchair. Something didn't match the story she had been told. And the vows tomorrow would unravel everything. The truth was, Emily had never planned to marry anyone, much less a millionaire whose life was wrapped in secrets and rumors. As she left Nathan's study, the air in the hallway felt heavier, pressing down on her like gravity had doubled. Every step echoed through the marble corridor, bouncing off the chandelier light, as if even the house itself was listening. She clutched her folder of medical bills against her chest, the edges cutting into her palm, a painful reminder of why she was here in the first place. Her mother's voice replayed in her mind, weak but warm, telling her she would be fine, telling her not to worry, telling her that life had a strange way of working itself out. But life was not working anything out. Not for her. Not when the hospital had called for the third time that morning. Not when she had seen the number in bright red ink. $62,000. Not when the doctor said, without the next treatment, the cancer will advance quickly. Emily stopped at the foot of the staircase, her hands trembling as she remembered standing in that same hospital room 2 days ago. Her mother, barely strong enough to lift her head, whispered, "Do not sell your life for me, sweetheart." But Emily only smiled and held her hand. Because what her mother did not know was that Emily already had. She remembered the landlord banging on her apartment door last week, demanding late rent she did not have. She remembered the night she sat in her car outside the diner after her shift, crying into her apron because the manager cut her hours again. She remembered how it felt to put gas in her car with quarters. She remembered drinking water for dinner because groceries had to wait. And then the letter arrived from the Lawson estate. A proposal dressed as salvation. Marry a stranger. Live in his mansion. Sign a contract. Smile at a wedding that was not real. Save your mother. Emily whispered into the empty hall. This is the only way. The only way. Her voice cracked, because she hated that it was true. She turned the corner and found herself outside the guest suite they prepared for her. A maid passed her, giving her a look that was not cruel but not kind either. The kind of look that said she knew exactly what Emily was here for. The kind of look that said she would never fit into this world of hushed footsteps and polished surfaces. Inside the suite, everything felt too soft, too clean, too expensive. The sheets smelled like lavender. The closet was filled with dresses she had never touched. And on the vanity sat the wedding gown they had chosen for her, wrapped in a protective cover like it was something sacred. Emily reached out and touched the smooth fabric. It was nothing like the thrifted skirts she wore to work. It felt unreal. It felt wrong. She sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. A wave of guilt washed over her. Guilt for using Nathan's family. Guilt for marrying a man she did not know. Guilt for trading her freedom for her mother's life. But behind the guilt was something sharper, something she hated admitting. Fear. Fear of Nathan. Fear of the contract. Fear of what she had seen in his eyes. That coldness. That exhaustion. That hint of something broken. And fear of what she had not seen. Why a billionaire would choose a waitress for this contract. Why he needed a wife at all. Why the wheelchair looked untouched. A soft knock startled her. Mr. Hale's voice came from the other side. Miss Carter, the wedding rehearsal will take place in 30 minutes. The groom is unavailable, but you will walk through your part with the coordinator. She wanted to ask why he was unavailable. She wanted to ask what he was hiding. But questions were against the rules. So she steadied her breath, stood up, and wiped her eyes. I will be there, she called back. When the door closed, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized the girl staring back. But tomorrow morning, she would have to stand beside Nathan Lawson as his wife. And she had no idea that the vows meant to bind them together would tear open the truth he had been hiding from the world. Emily stood in the center of the rehearsal hall feeling like she was made of glass, fragile enough to shatter with one wrong breath. The event coordinator, a tall woman with a headset and a clipboard, paced around her, adjusting the angle of her shoulders, the position of her hands, the exact number of seconds she should pause before pretending to admire the floral arch. Everything was scripted, down to the way she should smile as if she belonged here. But she did not belong anywhere near this world of ivory drapes, silver lanterns, and a chandelier. That looked big enough to crush a car. The coordinator spoke quickly, her words sharp and efficient. You will walk down the aisle at precisely 6 beats of the music. You will take your position here. You will nod politely to the guests. Remember, subtlety is key. The Lawsons value poise. Emily nodded, even though she barely heard half of what was said. Her mind kept drifting back to Nathan, to the untouched wheelchair, to the cold way he said she would leave him alone, to the strange flicker in his eyes when she mentioned her mother. Something about him gnawed at her thoughts, something that made her chest feel unsettled, like she was walking into a storm she could not see yet. As the coordinator repositioned her again, Emily caught the reflection of herself in one of the tall mirrors lining the hall. The lighting softened her inexpensive makeup, and the dress they had chosen for her made her look like she belonged to someone else's life. She whispered under her breath, This is not real. And yet, tomorrow it would be. After the rehearsal ended, Emily stepped out into the marble corridor, relieved to be away from the bright lights and constant instructions. The mansion was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you hear things that were not supposed to be heard. A faint sound drifted from down the hallway. A voice. A man's voice. Her heart skipped. She followed it, moving slowly, careful not to make noise on the polished floor. The voice grew clearer as she reached the wing that Mr. Hale said she was not permitted to enter. Nathan's private wing. The one she was forbidden from stepping into. Her pulse quickened. She knew she should turn around, but something in her gut urged her forward. She pressed her back against the wall, listening. Nathan's voice was low and tense. I told you, I will handle it. No one can know until after the ceremony. Another voice answered, deeper, older, angry. You think you can keep this up forever? You think the board will let you keep the foundation once they find out? Nathan replied sharply, they will not find out. Not yet. Emily felt her stomach clench. Find out what? A heavy door clicked shut, and panic shot through her. She rushed back down the hall, rounding the corner just as Nathan appeared. From the opposite direction. He stopped when he saw her, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and sharp like he was trying to see straight through her. What are you doing here? He asked softly, which somehow felt even more dangerous than if he had shouted. Emily forced her voice to sound steady. Rehearsal just ended. I got lost. Nathan's gaze flicked to the hallway she had come from. Suspicion clouded his features, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he moved past her, the faint scent of cedarwood and something clean trailing behind him. His steps were steady, too steady for someone supposedly unable to walk without assistance. He paused at the end of the hall and spoke without turning around. Remember the rules, Emily. My private wing is off limits. For your sake and mine. Then he disappeared behind the door of his study, the lock clicking into place. Emily stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. There was something he was hiding. Something big. And she was certain now that it was not about an injury. She made her way back to the guest suite, the weight of his words echoing in her head like a warning. She sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets, trying to steady her breath. Tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew, a man carrying secrets like armor, secrets he was trying desperately to bury. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, and Emily had a sinking feeling that the truth would not wait until the honeymoon. It would come crashing into the ceremony itself. Emily barely slept the night before the wedding, her mind replaying the voices she had overheard outside Nathan's private wing. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Nathan's steady footsteps, too controlled, too confident for a man the world believed to be paralyzed. When dawn finally crept through the curtains of her guest suite, soft and pale, she felt the weight of the day pressing onto her chest. This was the morning she would become Nathan Lawson's wife, even if the marriage itself was built on secrets and signatures. The mansion buzzed like a beehive, staff hurrying down hallways with garment bags, bouquets, polished silver trays, and velvet boxes. Emily stepped outside her room and nearly collided with a hairstylist holding a curling iron in one hand and a basket of makeup in the other. Good morning, Miss Carter, she said with mechanical cheer, already ushering her back inside. We have a tight schedule. Sit, please. For the next hour, hands moved around her in a blur, pinning her hair, brushing her cheeks, fastening jewelry that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Every once in a while, Emily caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked like a bride. She looked like someone who belonged to the Lawson dynasty. But beneath the lace, beneath the soft foundation and carefully curled hair, her pulse thudded with dread. When the coordinator finally inspected her one last time, she gave a satisfied nod. Perfect. The groom will meet you at the altar. Emily felt her stomach twist. Nathan had made it clear that their interactions were limited to what the contract required, and apparently, that did not include seeing her before the ceremony. She followed the coordinator through the hallway that led to the grand ballroom, where the ceremony would take place in front of a modest crowd of family members, board members, and a few strategically chosen business partners. The room was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, landing on the rows of ivory chairs, the archway of white roses, and the glossy marble aisle she would walk down. Every detail looked flawless, as if perfection itself had been choreographed. But beneath that beauty, Emily felt the tension in the air, a tension that told her the Lawson family was not as golden as it appeared. As guests began to take their seats, Emily stood behind the closed doors, clutching her bouquet so tightly the stems bit into her palms. She wondered if Nathan was already at the altar, sitting in that wheelchair everyone expected him to be in. Or would he be standing? Would he pretend? Or would the truth slip through the cracks of his calm facade? The music began, soft and slow, an elegant melody meant to soothe, but it only made her heartbeat thunder louder. The doors opened. Emily stepped forward. The room fell silent. And there he was, Nathan Lawson, standing, not leaning, not struggling, standing tall in a perfectly tailored black suit, his eyes locked onto hers with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "I thought he could not walk." Another murmured, "Is this a miracle?" Nathan did not react to any of it. His expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes, something fierce, something resigned, something like a man finally stepping into the fire he had been avoiding. Emily forced her feet to carry her down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. When she reached him, Nathan offered his hand. His fingers brushed hers, warm and steady. She looked up at him, confusion swirling with fear. He whispered so quietly only she could hear, "Just follow my lead." Before she could respond, the officiant began speaking. Emily barely heard the words. Her pulse drowned them out. Vows, promises, lines she was supposed to repeat. She felt herself nodding, speaking, breathing, even though every inch of her felt locked in place. And then it was Nathan's turn. He lifted his gaze, no longer cold, but filled with something she had not seen before. Resolve, pain, and a secret ready to break free. "There is something I must reveal," Nathan said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The guests leaned forward. Emily's breath hitched. The truth, whatever it was, had chosen this moment to surface. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Nathan stood at the altar, unmoving, a living contradiction to every rumor, every news headline, every whispered conversation about his supposed paralysis. Emily felt her fingers tighten around the bouquet, her pulse slamming against her ribs as Nathan's voice echoed through the sunlit hall. "Before I say these vows, you deserve to know the truth." Gasps fluttered through the rows of guests, sharp and stunned, like the crackle of static before a storm. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. Photographers froze with their cameras raised. Even the officiant hesitated, unsure whether he should continue speaking. Emily stared at Nathan, searching his face for any hint of what he was about to confess. But he did not look at her. Not at first. He looked at the people gathered before him, the family that barely visited, the partners who whispered behind closed doors, the board members whose eyes glimmered with calculation. Then he finally turned to her, and something raw flickered in his expression, something that made her chest tighten. He drew a slow breath. "I have been lying. To the public. To my board. To everyone except my attorney." A ripple of disbelief spread through the room. Someone whispered, "Lying about what?" Nathan continued, his voice steady but heavy. "I am not paralyzed. I never was." The shock was immediate and electric. A woman clapped a hand over her mouth. A man stood up in disbelief, and a dozen cameras clicked at once. Emily felt her heart plummet, her breath locking in her throat. She had suspected it, but hearing it aloud hit her like a blow. Nathan did not flinch at the outcry. "After the accident, the doctors told me I should have died. They said the brakes failed, but I knew better. Someone tampered with them. Someone wanted me gone." The room erupted again, but this time with fear. Board members whispered furiously. His mother's face went pale. Tension rippled across every row. Nathan's jaw tightened. If I told the truth, the person who did this would try again. And they would succeed. I needed time to find out who it was. Time to watch who would move to take control of the Lawson Foundation. He paused, breathing slowly, like the weight of his words was dragging against his chest. So I decided to disappear in plain sight. A paralyzed CEO was considered harmless. A man who could not walk was no longer a threat. And for a while, it worked. Emily's knees weakened, her fingers trembling around the bouquet. She whispered, "Why bring me into this?" Nathan slowly turned to her, and this time, his voice softened with something almost vulnerable. Because I needed someone the board could never predict. Someone who did not want money, power, or influence. Someone not connected to this family. Someone they would underestimate. Her breath hitched. So you chose me. Nathan nodded. You were the only part of this plan that was honest. I chose you because you asked for nothing. His words pierced her chest like a blade made of truth and regret. But before she could speak, a sharp voice cut through the silence. This is outrageous. A man from the first row jumped to his feet. Emily recognized him from the rehearsal photos on the walls, a senior board member with a reputation for ruthless decisions. You have deceived every shareholder, every partner, every donor. This marriage was a fraud from the start. Nathan's expression hardened, his stare cold as steel. This family built schools and hospitals using the foundation money. You wanted to redirect it to private investments. That is why you needed me out of the way. A collective gasp swept across the room. The board member flushed red, fury twisting his features, but he said nothing. He could not, because Nathan had just revealed the motive. And everyone in the room understood what that meant. Emily looked at Nathan, her voice trembling. So the accident. Nathan met her eyes, and there was no colder truth than the one he spoke next. The accident was an attempt to kill me, and the person who tried might still be in this room. The bouquet slipped slightly in her grip as her world lurched. In that moment, Emily realized she had not married into a contract. She had married into a war. For a long moment, the ballroom was suffocatingly silent, as if the air itself feared to move after Nathan's revelation. Emily felt hundreds of eyes dart between her and Nathan, as if searching for cracks in the story, looking for someone to blame, someone to accuse, someone to doubt. Her heart pounded in a wild, uneven rhythm, every beat whispering the same terrifying truth. She had stepped into this mansion believing she was signing a contract, but she had stepped into a battlefield instead. The officiant stood frozen, gripping his book so tightly the pages crumpled. Emily forced herself to breathe as Nathan turned toward her fully, his expression gentler than she had ever seen it. I never meant to drag you into danger, he said quietly, only for her. But the moment you signed the contract, you became the safest person in my life, and the most unpredictable for whoever is trying to destroy me. Emily felt her throat tighten as she whispered, Do you know who it is? Nathan shook his head, the faintest trace of bitterness in his voice. Not yet, but they know the truth now. They know I am not paralyzed, and they will not stop. A murmur rippled through the audience, building like a rising tide. Some guests shifted nervously in their seats. Others whispered accusations under their breath. Cameras clicked frantically as reporters fought to capture every moment, every expression, every tremble of tension. Suddenly, Nathan's mother stepped forward, her voice cracking like thin ice. Nathan, how could you hide this? From your own family? Nathan's jaw tightened. Because someone in this family, or someone on the board, wanted me dead. Gasps erupted again. His mother shook her head in disbelief, tears brimming in her eyes, but Nathan's gaze flicked away, searching the room like a man scanning for shadows in daylight. Emily felt something twist in her chest. The cold distance he wore like armor no longer looked like arrogance. It looked like fear and loneliness. Before anyone could speak again, Mr. Hale, the attorney, strode toward the altar, his expression grave. The board will demand an emergency meeting, he murmured to Nathan. They may attempt to remove you from the foundation entirely. Nathan's shoulders stiffened. Let them try. Emily watched him carefully. He looked strong on the outside, but she now understood the truth. He had been running, hiding, fighting alone for months. And he was exhausted. The officiant cleared his throat shakily. Should we continue with the ceremony? Silence swept the room again. All eyes turned to Emily, as if waiting for her reaction. Her hand trembled around the bouquet, and she whispered to Nathan, If we finish this ceremony, the danger becomes real for both of us. Nathan held her gaze, his voice low and steady. The danger was already real. At least now, we face it together. Something about the way he said together made Emily's breath catch. It was the first time he had not spoken in terms of contracts or rules. It was the first time he had spoken like a man, not a CEO bound by fear. Slowly, Emily nodded. The officiant, visibly shaken, resumed the vows. But just as Nathan reached for her hand to place the ring, a shout cut through the room. Stop the ceremony. Everyone turned sharply. At the back of the aisle stood a man in a dark suit, his face red with anger, pointing an accusing finger at Nathan. Emily recognized him as the same board member who had protested earlier. This marriage is a manipulation, a stunt. We cannot allow a liar, a fraud, to run the Lawson Foundation. Sit down, Nathan said sharply, his voice like a blade. But the man only grew louder. You will not silence me. The board deserves control. You were supposed to be out of the way. You were supposed to. He stopped abruptly, realizing too late what he had implied. The crowd erupted in horrified murmurs. Nathan stepped forward, his expression lethal. Thank you, he said softly, for admitting your involvement. The board member backed away, his composure crumbling. Security rushed to the front as he attempted to escape through a side door. Emily felt the world tilt for a moment, the reality hitting her like a wave. She had just witnessed the man who tried to kill her husband reveal himself in front of every witness. The officiant murmured, "Do you still wish to continue?" Nathan looked at Emily, and for the first time since she met him, he looked like a man stripped of every mask, every lie, every layer of indifference. It has to be your choice, he whispered. Emily stared at him, her breath trembling, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. And without breaking eye contact, she whispered back, "Then let us finish what we started." The room fell silent once more as the ceremony resumed, but the war that had been hiding in the shadows had finally shown its face. The applause that followed the end of the ceremony was thin and uneasy, nothing like the warm celebration a wedding was supposed to bring. It was the kind of scattered clapping people offered when they were not sure if they had just witnessed a union or the opening shot of a war. Emily felt Nathan's hand slip from hers as security escorted the exposed board member out the side door, the man shouting threats about lawsuits and shareholder rights until his voice was swallowed by the hallway. The guests dispersed quickly, whispering as they left, casting glances sharp with fear and curiosity. Emily stood at the altar feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions pressing down on her. She had just become a wife, legally and publicly, yet she felt more like she had stepped into the center of a firestorm. Nathan approached her slowly, his expression unreadable, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. "You handled that better than anyone could have," he said quietly. Emily let out a shaky breath. "I did not handle anything. I just stood there." Nathan shook his head. "You stood with me. That is more than anyone else in this room has done in months." His voice held a vulnerability that made Emily's chest tighten. But before she could answer, Mr. Hale hurried toward them, his face stern, his voice urgent. "The press is already requesting statements. The board is panicking. We need to move both of you to the private wing until security clears the area." Nathan's jaw flexed at the mention of his private wing, and Emily noticed how the staff tensed slightly at Mr. Hale's words. It made her realize something she had not noticed before. People in this house feared Nathan's private wing, and she still did not understand why. Nathan reached out and gently touched her elbow. "Come with me." Emily followed him through a back corridor, her footsteps echoing beside his. He walked with steady precision, not a hint of the injury the world believed he had. She found herself watching his gait, searching for signs of strain, but there were none. Either he had healed completely, or he was the kind of man who could hide pain behind stone. They reached a small, dimly lit room set aside for privacy during events. Nathan closed the door behind them, shutting out the noise of the mansion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily stared at him, her thoughts tangled. "You could have told me," she finally whispered. "You could have said something before the ceremony." Nathan exhaled slowly. "If I told you everything, you might have backed out of the contract. And if you walked away, I would have had no one I could trust in the room today." Emily felt the sting of honesty, sharp and uncomfortable. "So I was part of your plan. You were part of my survival," he corrected gently. Emily held his gaze, unsure whether she should feel flattered or frightened. "Nathan, I did not sign up for this kind of danger. I just wanted to save my mother. And I will keep my promise," he said firmly. "Your mother's treatment will be paid for in full." Gratitude and guilt slammed together in her chest. "But what about what just happened out there?" "It was inevitable," Nathan said. "Their desperation made them reckless." A deep silence settled between them, filled with tension neither of them could name. Finally, Nathan ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted in a way she had never seen before. Emily, this accident, the foundation, the board's power grab, it is all connected. The man who sabotaged the brakes is not working alone. Emily felt a chill prickle up her arms. Then what happens next? Nathan met her eyes, and the answer in his expression made her breath catch. Now that the truth is out, they will escalate. They will try to take the foundation by force, through the media, through the board, maybe even through legal manipulation. The marriage gives us leverage. It shows stability, but it also makes you a target. Her stomach tightened as fear settled deep inside her. I never wanted to be a target. Nathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a gentle tone she had not heard before. I know, and I will protect you. Emily felt her pulse flutter at the certainty in his voice, the closeness of him, the warmth of his promise. But before she could speak, the door burst open. A security guard rushed in, breathless. Sir, you need to come immediately. Someone tried to access the surveillance archives. The files from the night of your accident are missing. Nathan's expression turned into steel. Emily felt the world tilt under her feet. The enemy was no longer hiding. They had just made their next move. The moment the guard delivered the news, the atmosphere in the small room shifted from tense to electrified with danger, as if the walls themselves understood the magnitude of what had just been said. Emily felt her heart jolt, her breath catching in her throat as Nathan stepped forward with a sharp intensity she had not seen before. Which files? He demanded. The guard swallowed hard. The surveillance footage from the night of your accident, sir. The entire archive has been wiped. A cold silence fell like a shadow stretching across the room. Nathan's jaw tightened as he ran a hand slowly across his face, exhaling through his teeth. They are covering their tracks. Emily felt a tremor ripple through her chest. But why now? Right after the ceremony. Nathan turned to her, his eyes dark with realization. Because the board member who exposed himself today was never working alone. Someone else is still out there, someone who saw the ceremony fall apart and decided to erase the last piece of evidence that could expose them. Mr. Hale stepped into the room just then, his voice low and urgent. Nathan, the remaining board members have locked themselves in the East Conference Room. They are calling for an emergency vote to suspend your authority. They want to seize control of the foundation before the markets open tomorrow. Emily felt her stomach twist as the enormity of the situation sank in. They are moving fast. Nathan nodded grimly. Faster than I expected. Mr. Hale looked at Emily, his voice softening. Mrs. Lawson, for your safety, you should stay here. But Emily shook her head. No. Anything involving the foundation affects me too now. I want to understand what we are up against. Nathan stared at her for a moment, something warm flickering in his eyes, something that softened his features even in the midst of chaos. Then stay close to me, he said quietly. No matter what. They moved down the hallway together, passing staff who whispered in frightened tones as word spread that someone had tampered with the archive room. When they reached the surveillance control center, the door hung open, its electronic lock blinking red. Wires were exposed. The monitors flickered. Someone had ripped open the system panel as if they knew exactly which components to dismantle. Nathan crouched beside the damaged console, examining the hardware. This was not done in a hurry, he murmured. This was done by someone who knew the system intimately, someone with access. Emily felt a chill slide down her spine. Someone inside the house. Nathan nodded, his expression tightening. Yes, and someone who does not care about who gets hurt in the crossfire. As the guard stepped out to secure the perimeter, Nathan rose and turned to Emily. His voice was low, steady, and filled with a truth he could no longer hide. Emily, when I asked you to marry me, it was out of necessity. It was strategy. But what I did not tell you was why the marriage mattered strategically. Emily swallowed, bracing herself. Nathan continued. My father's will contains a clause. The chairmanship of the foundation can only be challenged if the heir is unmarried. A legally recognized spouse restricts the board's ability to force a leadership vote. Emily's breath caught. So the marriage protects your position. Nathan nodded. Yes, it was the only way to buy time. The board accelerated their attack when they thought I was weak. When they thought I could not walk. Marrying you was my last line of defense. Emily felt her chest tighten, guilt and anger warring inside her. And you did not think I deserved to. Know that before I said my vows. I was protecting you, he said softly. The less you knew, the safer you were. Emily stepped back, her voice shaking but controlled. You do not get to decide what protects me. Not when my name is now tied to your war. Nathan looked stricken for a brief moment. As if her words struck a place inside him he rarely let anyone touch. But before he could speak, the guard returned, breathless again. Sir, you need to see this. The cameras did not just get wiped. Someone left a message. Nathan and Emily followed him to the main monitor. The screen flickered before displaying a single line of text. You should have stayed dead. Emily's blood ran cold. Nathan stared at the message, his expression hollowing into something fierce and wounded. For a moment, she saw the truth beneath his armor. He was terrified, not for himself, but for her. He turned to her slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily, I dragged you into this world thinking I could keep you safe. But whoever did this, they are not afraid of killing. Emily felt her breath tremble as she whispered. So what do we do now? Nathan met her eyes, and in that instant, a new resolve sparked between them, stronger than fear, stronger than secrets. Now, he said, we fight back. Together. The message on the screen echoed in Emily's mind long after the letters faded, a chilling reminder that the danger surrounding Nathan was far from over. But as they stood together in that dim surveillance room, something shifted. The fear that once isolated them now bound them instead, threading their lives tightly together in a way no contract ever could. Nathan looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, stripped of power and pretense. I cannot let them hurt you, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Emily met his gaze, realizing that despite everything he had hidden, this was the one truth he could not disguise. Then let us finish this, she said softly. Let us end what they started. Nathan nodded once, a sharp, determined movement, and for the first time since she met him, she saw not the cold, guarded CEO, but a man ready to fight for something other than himself. Mr. Hale returned moments later with documents and updates, explaining that the emergency board vote had already been initiated. They are claiming instability, he said. They are attempting to remove you on the grounds of deception and mental unfitness. Nathan's jaw clenched. They cannot win unless they have unanimous support. Mr. Hale hesitated. They will, unless you present evidence that proves the attempted murder. The board cannot strip you of authority if doing so exposes them to criminal investigation. Emily glanced at the destroyed surveillance hardware. But they erased the evidence. Not all of it, Nathan said quietly. He motioned for the guard to follow him, and they moved deeper into the private wing. Emily stayed close, her pulse quickening as they passed rooms she had never seen before, halls lined with photographs of Nathan's childhood, his father, early projects for the Lawson Foundation. Nathan stopped at a secure door and typed a code into a keypad. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small office with a single safe inside the wall. Nathan opened it with a key only he possessed. From the safe, he removed a hard drive sealed in a protective case. This, he said, is the backup footage from the camera mounted inside my car. It records automatically in case of collisions. The board did not know this existed. Emily's heart pounded as he connected the drive to a laptop. The footage loaded instantly. The screen showed a younger, tired-looking Nathan sitting behind the wheel on the night of the supposed accident. Then his expression shifted to confusion as the brakes failed. The car swerved violently. A flash of panic crossed his face. And then, clear as day, a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the frame as the car spun, a gloved hand pulling away from the road barrier, the faint outline of a tool in hand, the exact moment the sabotage became undeniable. The room was silent as the truth played out in pixel and shadow. Mr. Hale exhaled shakily. This is enough to stop the vote, and to have the board member arrested, he said. Nathan nodded, but his gaze was fixed on Emily. They wanted control of the foundation, but they did not think anyone would stand beside me long enough to uncover the truth. Emily stepped closer, her voice gentle. You are not alone anymore. Nathan reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers with a warmth that startled her in. It's sincerity. I do not want this marriage to be just a shield, he said quietly. I want it to be real. Emily felt her breath catch, emotions swelling in her chest with a fierce and unexpected tenderness. Then let us choose each other for real, she whispered. Together, They walked into the East Conference room where the board had gathered to stage their final attack. When the doors opened, every head turned, shock rippling through the room. Nathan placed the hard drive on the table. "The vote is over," he said, voice steady and commanding. "And your crimes are exposed." The guilty board member's face drained of color as security closed in. The others lowered their heads in silent defeat, knowing the truth had stripped them of every weapon. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the Lawson estate, painting the sky in soft pink and gold, Nathan led Emily to the garden just outside the ballroom where everything had begun. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "No contracts," he said softly. "No rules. Just us." He opened it to reveal a simple gold band, elegant and unpretentious. "Emily Carter Lawson," he murmured. "Will you stay with me? Not because you have to, but because you choose to?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose you." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger with a trembling hand, and when he pulled her into his arms, Emily realized something she had not understood until this moment. Love built on truth was stronger than the fear that tried to destroy it. And as they stood together beneath the fading light, a new beginning unfolded, not written by contracts or schemes, but by the courage of two people who refused to let darkness win.